Good morning. Good morning, everyone. And it's good to see you all here today. I want to mention at the very beginning that this Friday, December 8th, is Rohatsu, the time of celebration of the Buddha's enlightenment. So I would encourage everyone to, on that day, allot some time for sitting practice and keep in mind with gratitude any benefit that you have derived from the Buddha's teachings and practice. This Friday, December 8th, Rohatsu. So we have been discussing the Lotus Sutra, and it's a relatively long work, and we've kind of skipped through it a bit, but today we're going to be talking about chapter 12, as in Kumarajiva's translation. And we've been using Jean Reeves' English translation predominantly. And chapter 12 has really two parts. The first part is about Devadatta, and that's what we'll talk about today. The second part is about the Naga princess, or the dragon princess, and we'll take that up at another time. So the chapter is entitled Devadatta, and I think it's necessary, at least for many of us, perhaps all of us, to have a little backstory before going into this chapter, because the chapter assumes some knowledge about Devadatta that would be that all of the readers and listeners of the Lotus Sutra in Asia would probably be well aware of, but Westerners might not be. The Buddhist canon is huge, and it's hard to, well, it's impossible to fathom at all. But Devadatta, who was he? Devadatta was the brother of Yasadasa, or Yasadara, Buddha's wife. And he was also, since both of them were cousins of the Buddha, he was a maternal cousin and also a brother-in-law of the Buddha. So they had a history together. And when the Buddha started gathering followers after his enlightenment, Devadatta was one of the first to sign on and become a monk, a follower of the Buddha. At first, Devadatta seemed to be just sort of a model monk. He was very attentive to the precepts and bright, intelligent, grasped concepts quickly, and everything kind of rolled along smoothly until later in the Buddha's life and in Devadatta's life. Devadatta was taken with envy, jealousy of the Buddha, and a desire for position and power. And actually wanted to displace the Buddha as leader of the Sangha. And he made this known publicly at an event, and the Buddha refused to let him take over. The idea was that Devadatta said, well, you're about 70 now, you're getting old, why don't you let somebody a little younger take over, like me? And the Buddha, perceiving some greed on the part of Devadatta, refused this request, and more or less embarrassed Devadatta. Well, Devadatta started scheming in his mind. Not all of this story is probably factual, and and that's not the point. But anyway, the story goes like this: that he he had a friend who was a prince, and the father of his prince was king of an adjacent kingdom, and the king disapproved of Devadatta. So Devadatta had an idea that if he could just get rid of the Buddha and get rid of the king, all would go well and he could ascend to power. So he talked with his friend and talked him into this plan that his friend would kill his father and Devadatta would kill the Buddha. Well, his friend went ahead and killed his father. And Devadatta had to come up with an idea to kill the Buddha. Not doing it out in the open, because that would be met with much disapproval from the Sangha, obviously, to say the least. But he had the idea of hiring an assassin, a skilled archer, to kill the Buddha. And in order to cover his tracks, he hired another couple archers to kill the assassin. And then, as the story goes, 4 more archers to kill the assassin of the assassins of the assassin. So he really worked hard to sort of create the perfect crime. Well, what happened was that the assassin was so taken with the Buddha that he became a monk. And so did the assassin's assassin. And ultimately, the whole group of potential assassins became monks and followers of the Buddha. So that plan didn't work out. Plan B was to roll a heavy rock down the side of the mountain when the Buddha was walking on a path in the mountainside and crush the Buddha. So since the Buddha's patterns were fairly predictable and he knew when he would be walking along a path, Devadatta got up high on the mountain and rolled the stone down at the perfect time, but it was deflected by another rock that was on the mountainside and went off in a different direction and did not hit the Buddha. But it did produce a little chip that hit the Buddha's toe and caused some bleeding. And that's significant, as we'll see. So that plan B didn't work. So plan C was to create a schism in the Sangha. So what Devadatta did was advocate 5 additional precepts or rules for the monks that were very severe. For example, they were not to take shelter when it rained. They were to sleep outside under trees at all times, even during the rainy season. And there were several other, very severe kinds of restrictions. And he talked many of the monks, it is said 500, into following him, saying that these severe restrictions were really the true precepts, and the Buddha was sort of watering things down and making it easy. But this is the real thing. So if you're really a monk, this is what you do. So he did get some followers that way, and it did, at least for a time, produce a schism in the Sangha. However, Shariputra succeeded in talking with these 500 monks and encouraging them to go back and join the Buddha once again. So plan C didn't work either, and at this point, Devadatta was getting older. He was getting perhaps a little wiser and realized the error of his ways, and was on his way back to apologize to the Buddha and rejoin the Sangha if he could, when he fell ill and died. So so Devadatta was clearly a villain figure in the Buddha story, and he violated some of the gravest of precepts. He encouraged his friend to kill his father. He injured the Buddha, and he caused a schism in the Sangha. So these are very grave precepts that he violated. And traditionally, as a punishment for these kinds of grave precepts, he would suffer in Avicii hell after death. Now, Avicii hell was not eternal, it was just temporary, but it went on for a long, long, long time. And it was extremely unpleasant. And presumably that's what happened with Devadatta. So now we get to what is in the chapter 12, which doesn't even mention any of that, but it was all assumed knowledge. At that time, the Buddha addressed the bodhisattvas, the human and heavenly beings, and the four groups, saying, "Through innumerable eons in the past, I tirelessly sought the Dharma flower Sutta." So he's talking about a long, 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 long time ago. The Buddha in previous lives was seeking the Dharma flower Sutta. Throughout those many eons, I was a king who vowed to seek unexcelled awakening, never faltering and wanting to become fully developed in the six transcendental practices. The king diligently and unstintingly gave alms, elephants, horses, the 7 rare things, countries, cities, wives, children, male and female servants, attendants, and even his own head, eyes, marrow, brain, flesh, hands, and feet, not sparing his body or his life. So he was ardently seeking unexcelled awakening. At that time, a person's lifetime was beyond measure. For the sake of the Dharma, he gave up his kingdom and throne, left the government to the crown prince, sounded drums, and sent proclamations in all directions, seeking the Dharma and saying, "For the rest of my life, I will be the provider and servant for anyone who can teach me the great vehicle." Then a seer came to the king and said, "I have a great vehicle sutra named the Lotus flower of the wonderful Dharma. If you will obey me, excuse me, if you will obey me, I will explain it to you." Hearing what the seer said, the king became ecstatic with joy and immediately went with him, providing for his needs, gathering fruit, drawing water, collecting firewood, laying out his food, even offering his body as a seat and bed, yet never feeling tired physically or emotionally. During this period of service, all for the sake of the Dharma, 1,000 years passed in which he diligently provided for the seer so he would lack nothing. The king at that time was me, and the seer was the present Devadatta. Because Devadatta was a good friend to me, I was able to become fully developed in the 6 transcendental practices, in kindness, compassion, joy, and impartiality, in the 32 characteristics, the 80 different attractive features, the deep gold color, the 10 powers, the 4 kinds of freedom from fear, the 4 social teachings, the 18 kinds of uniqueness, and the powers of the divine way. That I have attained impartial, proper awakening and saved many of the living beings due to my good friend, I owe to Devadatta. I declare to all 4 groups, and after innumerable eons have passed, Devadatta will become a Buddha, whose name will be Heavenly King Tathagata, one worthy of offerings, truly awakened, fully clear in conduct, well gone, understanding the world, unexcelled leader, trainer of men and women, teacher of heavenly beings and people, Buddha, well-honored one. So that's essentially the section of the Lotus Sutra about Devadatta. And this would have been kind of shocking to listeners and to readers of this sutra because clearly in the early Buddhist teachings, the story sort of ends when he's in Avicii hell and being punished for his grave misdeeds. But here, the Buddha, despite his misdeeds, is informing us that in the past, Devadatta, in many past lives, Devadatta actually accounted for the Buddha's awakening, allowed him to achieve the wisdom that he has, and allowed him to share this wisdom with others. So he feels a debt of gratitude to Devadatta and predicts that he too will become a Buddha in the future. It'll take a long time, but sometime in the future, he will become a Buddha. So what do we make of this story? I was having a conversation with a friend earlier this week, and we were talking about various things related to incarceration and how prisons are viewed, what they're for, and that sort of thing. And he was expressing, I don't know how exactly the conversation got started, but he was expressing the belief that anyone who took a life who was a murderer should never get out of prison. And furthermore, prison shouldn't be pleasant either. It should be unpleasant for the rest of one's life. He doesn't believe in the death penalty, but he does believe in punishment. And I mentioned to him a friend of myself and Carol, who, as I recall, his crime was murder at the age of 16 or thereabouts, and was in prison more than 30 years later without any real prospect of parole. So very likely to be in prison all his life. Mhm. And he's made the best of it. He's a very religious person, studies various religious traditions, including Buddhism, and has really been a model prisoner for decades. I also mentioned that my son-in-law is working with others on a project to provide college education and credits to people who are incarcerated in the state of Missouri. And this project is moving right along and is actually taking place now in some of the prisons. Um, my friend, my friend had a stepdaughter at one time whose boyfriend uh, committed a murder and was only incarcerated for 15 years, after which he came out. And my friend was saying, this is just totally wrong. He should never have the opportunity to walk freely in the world after taking someone's life, someone who has been denied the opportunity of ever living in the world again. So we didn't come to full agreement on all this, but had I think, a helpful discussion. And the root of the word prison, it goes back to the meaning of the root is to take or to seize, whereas the root of the word penitentiary is related to repentance. So those two words really kind of crystallize the uh, divergence of poles of thinking about what punishment or what incarceration should be about, whether it's about endless punishment or some interval of extreme punishment, or whether it's about rehabilitation, about um, the opportunity for repentance. Repentance, of course, being feeling remorse or regret for a misdeed, and also feeling a desire to avoid similar things in the future, a desire to grow and transform and become a better person. In a way, this chapter is shocking, this story about Devadatta, because it would indicate that even the most villainous of people, and presumably, as we read about Devadatta, we have to think, well, that's really bad. I'm bad, but I'm not that bad. Even the most villainous of people will become Buddhas, or potential Buddhas. So if you view people that way, that everyone is a potential Buddha, has, as it's said, has Buddha nature. And that's a different way of living in the world, isn't it? Than dichotomizing people into good and bad. Everyone, regardless of their misdeeds, has this potential. It's not a theory that I think can be proven. So it's really a matter of faith, a matter of belief, a matter of choice as to how you view people. And really kind of a revolutionary departure from, I would say, the usual view. And expressed in the Lotus Sutra in this way. So this chapter would have been shocking for those exposed to it for the first time in the distant past, and I think it continues to be a little shocking now. So how do we view people? How do we view those who seem to be totally misguided, totally deluded? Is it possible? Is it realistic to view them as potential Buddhas? So I'll stop with that. And perhaps we can break up into groups now and discuss the issues that clearly arise from the 12th chapter of the Lotus Sutra.